I signed my name to the guest log with the same pen I'd used to sign my marriage certificate 31 years earlier. Same looping D, same steady line across the T, same patience between strokes. The hospice receptionist smiled at me like you smile at a man carrying weather in on his coat. "Good morning, Mr. Keene." "It will be," I said, and meant it in that soft way people mean it when they're lying only to themselves. Ruth had always said I wrote like a carpenter, measured square, no flourish I couldn't sand out later. She was the one with the flourish. I built cabinets. She built a family. We started with a 600-square-foot starter home and 2 hand-me-down mugs. And by the time the kids were in high school, the workshop out back smelled like cedar and lemon oil and quiet satisfaction. People around town would run their hands along my work like it was a creek stone, smooth enough to make you forget it once had edges that could cut you. When the doctor said the word glioblastoma, it landed like a nail thrown point first. Ruth took it like a stoic. I took it like a man who needs something to fix and has just been shown the one thing his hands can't hold together. For 9 months, I was a student of machines. 4 pumps, feeding tubes, little screens that sang Ruth's biology into graphs. I learned which nurses liked black coffee and which ones cried in the elevator when they thought no one was watching. I learned how to fold a hospital blanket so it tucked under her heels without rubbing, and how to listen when the room went quiet in that way that made you believe angels are just nurses who took their masks off. I also learned my children were strangers. It's not that we weren't close once. Lila used to sit on the bench in my shop with sawdust in her hair like confetti, drawing castles I'd later cut into headboards. Owen would spend afternoons building crooked shelves he insisted were modern, and I would pretend the angles were on purpose. They laughed at my dad jokes and ate the pancakes I burned and drew Mother's Day cards that made Ruth cry for all the right reasons. They grew, as children do. Lila left for a marketing job in the city that paid more in a month than I'd made in my first year of business. Owen went to law school and learned to speak in a way that turned sentences into fences. We were proud. We said the word like a blessing and meant it like a defense. Proud, so we wouldn't have to say distant. Still, they came home for holidays. They teased me for never upgrading the truck. They rolled their eyes at our habit of handing each other a thumb squeeze when words wouldn't do. They loved us. I didn't doubt that. They just loved their reflection a little more. When hospice came, I told them, they came. Lila in a black coat meant for a different climate. Owen with a laptop that never closed and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to sleep. "Dad," Lila said, touching the bed rail like it might bruise, "how long?" "We count in good days," I said. "This is one. She knows your perfume." Ruth's eyes were open and bright. She reached and found my fingers without looking. Her wedding band had slipped loose enough to spin freely on her finger. "Deck," she whispered. "Short for Decker, the name my father gave me and everyone else did too, once they'd seen the shop." "I'm here, Rue," I said. I kissed her hairline and breathed in the smell of shampoo and that faint hospital antiseptic that makes you understand how clean can also be lonely. The chaplain came and prayed in a voice that sounded like woodwind. The neighbors brought casseroles like offerings. The hours unspooled, sun across the window, night cupped against the glass. And then, 3 mornings later, with the dawn turning pink like an apology, Ruth breathed out slower than she breathed in, and the room went still in that irreversible way water goes still when the stone finally stopped skipping. I buried her with my hands in my pockets so no one could see them shake. I touched the headstone I'd carved myself and thought about the first shelf I ever built for her dorm room, a crooked thing that held books and a potted fern and the promise we could make something sturdy out of what we were given. After the funeral, the house was full. There was laughter, too loud, and music, too bright, and a buffet line like a small town had moved into my kitchen. I stood by the fridge in my good shirt and accepted hugs from people who hadn't used my name in years. "She was a saint," someone said. "You two were solid," someone else offered, like they were describing furniture. Around 6, people started leaving. By 8, the last casserole had found its way to my freezer. By 9, I was standing in the driveway watching the tail lights peel away like embers. Lila stayed. Owen stayed. They were doing that dance adult children do, where they try to decide if being with a newly lonely parent is charity or obligation or something like love dressed up for a party. "Dad," Owen said, putting a hand on my shoulder like a lawyer about to serve papers. "Can we talk?" "We're already doing it," I said, because grief makes you mean in small ways. "In the study," he said, and there was no "please." Lila went ahead with the tote bag, the one she carried as if she were boarding a flight. The study smelled like lemon oil and paper. The mahogany desk sat under the window the way it had for 27 years. The dent on the corner still remembered the time Owen launched a Hot Wheels car like a comet. On the wall, a frame with the deed to the shop, a photo of Ruth with a sun hat too big for her head, a drawing Lila made when she was 9 of a house with someone waving in every window. Owen sat behind the desk. Lila perched on the edge of a chair like she was posing for a brochure. "Dad," Owen said, steepling his fingers, "this is awkward." "No," I said, "a funeral is awkward. This is something else." Lila glanced at Owen the way you look at a flight attendant when you hit turbulence. He slid a manila folder across the desk. "It's about the estate," he said. "My estate," I said, and watched the word land between us like a challenge coin. "Mom's," Lila corrected gently. "But, together." I sat. There was a glass of water already sweating on a coaster. I didn't remember pouring it. Owen adjusted his tie even though he wasn't wearing one. "We need to update things," he said. "It's all very standard." "Nothing about this is standard," I said, and picked up the folder. Inside, typed pages, tabs like little flags marking someone else's caution. "Per our discussion," one line said. "In light of Ruth Keene's last wishes," another claimed. The words swam a little. Grief had put a film on my eyes that wipes off only when sleep finally wins. "Last wishes?" I asked. "She had last wishes I didn't hear?" Lila leaned forward, the perfume I bought her for Christmas filling the space between us. "Dad, we're on your side. We just want to help make this easy." "Easy," I repeated, as if tasting the word could make it change. Owen's voice softened, the way lawyers soften when they want you to sign something you'll regret in a week. "You're tired, Dad. You'll want to downsize. The house is a lot of work. The shop is, well, it's sentimental, but the market's peaking. If we liquidate the property, invest the proceeds, we can—" "We?" I asked. "We can build a portfolio that generates income for your retirement." He finished without blinking. Safer, diversified. Safer than the shop? I said. Safer than the thing that kept you in braces and Lila in dance shoes and your mother in that blue dress she loved? Lila put a hand on my arm. Dad, listen. Mom talked to me about this. She wanted us to take care of you. The sentence had the right shape and the wrong soul. When? I asked. A few weeks before, Lila said, eyes on the desk. She asked about making sure you wouldn't be overwhelmed. Owen slid another paper forward. So we drafted a trust. Very common. It would transfer title of the house and the shop into the Keene family trust. I'd serve as trustee, strictly administrative. You'd have lifetime use. We'd manage the assets, handle paperwork, pay taxes. In exchange for what? I asked, though I already knew. The oldest exchange in the world, power for protection, freedom for convenience, names on paper for a promise you can't enforce when you need it most. In exchange for avoiding probate, Owen said, and for making sure there's structure. For you, for Lila, for Emma, my granddaughter, 6 years old and pure grace when she eats a popsicle too fast and gets a headache and insists she's fine anyway because heroes don't cry. They'd put her in the sentence the way marketers put family in ads for life insurance. Structure, I said. What's the structure exactly? Owen exhaled. We'd be custodians. You'd have a stipend, monthly, comfortable. I looked at the window. The maple tree had started its show early that year, each leaf telling the same story in different shades. Let go, let go, let go. In the glass, I saw the faint reflection of Ruth's sun hat, of Lila at 9, of Owen at 7, with a cowlick that wouldn't behave. I saw a man who had built his life one measured cut at a time and was now being told to hand the saw to his children because grief made his hands shaky. I turned another page. My eyes caught on a sentence that had been tucked into the middle like a snake in tall grass. Trustee may, at his sole discretion, sell, transfer, or encumber any trust asset to serve the interests of the beneficiaries. Sole discretion, I said. Whose? Owen didn't answer right away. It's standard language, he said. Whose? I asked again. He cleared his throat. Mine, he said, with Lila as successor. I set the folder down like it might break if I moved too fast. I thought about Ruth's last week, the way her thumb squeezed mine, even when her voice was borrowed by the morphine. We'd talked about the shop. I'd promised to keep the smell of cedar in the air. She'd smiled like a secret and said, "You always do what you say." Lila's phone vibrated on the desk. She silenced it without looking. "Dad," she said softer, "it's just, Mom was worried about you, about the house, about the loneliness." Loneliness. The word is honest the way a mirror is honest. It tells you what you already know and offers no solution. I nodded. Your mother was smart. So, Owen said, let us be smart for you. I folded my hands. They looked like my father's hands in winter, knuckles white from the old injuries, skin like parchment, where the sun had convinced it to crack. I'm not signing anything today, I said. Owen sat back like a judge who has just overruled an objection. No pressure, he said, and smiled a smile meant to be disarming and landed 2 inches to the left. After they went to bed, I carried the folder out to the shop. The lights hummed like bees. I set the papers on the workbench where I'd smoothed 1,000 edges and gouged 1,000 more. I ran my palm over the grain. Oak forgives you if you learn how to ask. I read every line. I reread the ones that felt too smooth. By 2 a.m., a shape had emerged. A plan that looked like care wearing the mask of control. It was a good plan if you believed I was a problem to be managed. It was an excellent plan if you wanted the shop and the house and the land to stop being mine as soon as I signed. At 3 a.m., I turned off the lights and walked the room the way I had 2 weeks after we bought the place, imagining where everything would go. Bandsaw there, planer there, Ruth's stool in the corner where she'd sit and read and tell me I was sanding too aggressively. On the back wall, the clock I never wound because her laughter told better time. At 4, I poured coffee and watched the sky lighten. Lila came down in a robe and hugged me from behind like when she was little, and mornings were a game we played called Who Loves Who the Most. She said she loved me. She meant it. I said I loved her. I meant it more than anything I'd ever said. At 7, Owen woke, already in a suit he'd never wrinkled. He poured his own coffee and didn't look at me when he said, "We'll come back tonight and go over it again." "At dinner," I said. "We'll eat at the table. Like a family." He nodded, and we did. And after dinner, he put the papers on the table like he was dealing cards he knew could only play one way. I nodded along. I asked questions that sounded naive and weren't it. I circled words in pencil like hard candy in a jar. I asked them both to explain things they thought I couldn't understand. They were patient with me the way doctors are patient with patients who don't know the Latin for their own organs. At 9, I said, "I'll sign." Relief loosened their shoulders like a second drink. Owen slid the pages to the signature tabs. 3 bright flags like chins lifted. He uncapped a pen and slid it to me. "Here," he said, voice softened again. "Right there." I took the pen. I turned it in my hand the way I test a chisel for balance. I looked at Lila. At the spot in the air Ruth might be occupying if the rules of physics were kinder. "On one condition," I said. "Dad," Lila laughed, "it's not a negotiation." "With me, everything is," I said, and kept my smile easy so they wouldn't feel how sharp it was. "Put in a line that says, 'No trust asset may be sold without the written consent of the settler.'" Owen frowned. "The settler is Mom." "Then add, 'or if deceased, the surviving spouse,'" I said, "whose name is on the deed you're trying so hard to pretend is just a document instead of a promise." Owen opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "It defeats the purpose of trustee discretion." "It preserves the purpose," I said. "Your mother gave me this life, and I am not handing it to you in pieces you can pawn for convenience. Add the line." He stared at me long enough for Lila to step in. "Just add it," she said. "It makes him comfortable." Owen typed the words with the kind of sigh a man makes when he thinks he's compromising for the greater good. He printed a fresh copy. He slid it to me. "Now?" he asked, pen poised. "Now," I said, and signed. D. Steady. T. Marked true. They hugged me like children hug Santa in a mall, quick, hopeful, transactional. They slept the sleep of winners. I walked to the shop and lay on the floor and cried into sawdust that stuck to my face like freckles. I cried for Ruth. I cried because the word family had been used like a crowbar. I cried because I had signed something I understood better than they did. In the morning, while they were still asleep and my coffee still tasted like the first day of a fishing trip, I made calls. Not to lawyers, not first, to people who owe me the same kind of loyalty I've given them for years. I called Benny, who's been fixing trucks for half the county since Reagan was president. I called Nora, who does title work and has a longer memory than the courthouse. I called Tamsin, who used to be a CPA and now runs a bakery, but still knows how to read a statement like it's a confession. I called Ruth's sister because grief weaponized looks too much like divorce to leave family out of it. By noon, I had a folder that looked innocent and wasn't. By 3, I had a plan that felt like sandpaper, rough at first, but capable of making something smooth enough to touch your face to. By sundown, the maple tree out front had dropped one leaf directly onto the porch railing where Ruth used to rest her coffee. I put my thumb on it. It crumbled soft into something that looked like the dirt that raises everything if you give it time. That night, over meatloaf and mashed potatoes, I let them lay out the schedule. "We'll do title transfer Friday," Owen said. "Nora at the courthouse can push it through." "She can," I said, and smiled because I know what Nora pushes and when. "We'll get a home equity line of credit on the house," Lila said brightly. "No taxes on proceeds." Then move to Treasury ladders for safety. "Treasury ladders?" I repeated like I was learning a dance. "Do we dance to them or file them?" "Dad," Owen said an edge, "don't. We're trying to help." "You are," I said, "and I'm letting you." He relaxed. Lila squeezed my hand under the table the way Ruth used to when I was about to say something we'd later have to explain to the pastor. After they went to bed, I walked to the study and took the will out of the safe. I read Ruth's handwriting on the sticky note she'd left for me on the front. "Deck, remember the thumb squeeze. It means we mean it." I thumb squeezed the note until the paper creased around the pressure. Friday came like a man who shows up early to apologize. We went to the courthouse in good clothes. Nora greeted us with smiles and stamps and forms that clicked under her hand like a piano. Owen signed. Lila initialed. I witnessed, like a good man does, when his children think they're building a future that will hold. Then my turn. "One more document," I said, pulling a page from my folder. Owen frowned. "Dad, we agreed." "Ancillary," I said. "A survivorship amendment. Clarifies homestead rights." Nora read it, lips moving just enough for me to see her brain shift into higher gear. She looked at me over her readers. I nodded once. She stamped. "What was that?" Owen asked. "Protection," I said, and walked us back into the late morning light that made even the courthouse steps look warm. We celebrated with lunch at Molly's Diner because Ruth loved their lemon pie, and I needed to sit somewhere my grief had precedent. While Lila went to the restroom and Owen sent an email that probably had more consequence than he understood, I looked at the fork in my hand. It was heavy, stainless steel, weighted just right in the handle. The kind of utensil that makes you appreciate an everyday thing. I wondered if the man who made it ever felt like I did now. The quiet knowledge that he'd balanced something other people would use without thinking. By Sunday, the papers had recorded. By Tuesday, Owen had a cash-out plan. By Wednesday, Tamsin had reconciled 3 years of tax returns and found the line where prudent management becomes creative interpretation. By Thursday, Nora called me at dawn. "He tried," she said. "Of course he did," I said. He filed a preliminary notice on the shop, she said. Intention to sell. Fast, I said. Faster than grief. It didn't stick. Why? I asked, even though I could feel the answer rising like coffee steam. She laughed into the phone like the sound of flour hitting a counter. Because the survivorship amendment you slid under my nose Friday, she said. You reserved a life estate in the homestead and the contiguous working parcel. He can transfer title all day long. He can't take the keys out of your hand. I sat on the porch with the phone to my ear and watched the sun flip the maple into fire. Thank you, I said. You'll owe me a pie, she said. Lemon? I made two. That afternoon, Lila came over alone. Owen was in meetings. She brought a lunch in a bag with a brand name that made me feel like I should apologize for my Tupperware. We ate on the back steps. She tucked her legs under her like she used to. Dad, she said, you're mad. No, I said, mad is loud. I'm listening. To what? To the part of me that sounds like your mother when she'd say, be gentle, but don't be a fool. Lila's eyes filled, and then emptied, and then filled again. We were trying to keep you safe, she said. I know, I said, and I'm trying to keep me free. She nodded like a woman who knows a bargain when she hears one and doesn't like the price. Owen thought, I know what Owen thought, I said. He thought I was a man made soft by grief. You are, she said, and then bit her lip like the truth had jumped out without permission. But you're also... She looked at the shop, the maple, the house that had taught us all how to be a family. You're also you. Tell your brother, I said, before he learns it from someone who isn't as patient as I'm being. That night, Owen arrived with a binder. He put it on the table and opened it to a page with numbers that looked clean enough to eat. We can realize 7 figures, he said, voice humming with the high you get when you convinced yourself the future owes you. We cannot sell the shop, I said. He blinked. Dad, you cannot, I said, and slid Nora's message across the table. You filed an intent. It bounced. He stared at the paper like a cat stares at a mirror. You added a life estate. I preserved what was already alive, I said. Words don't resurrect anything. They just fence it in. He shut the binder like a verdict and stood. You don't trust me, he said. I looked at him long enough for him to remember I'd taught him to read by tracing letters in the grit on the shop floor. I trust you to be who you are, I said, a man who believes management is love. I am reminding you that sometimes love is letting a man keep his hands on his own tools. He flushed. Fine, he said, and left without hugging me because men trained in argument believe leaving is a form of winning. That night, I walked the shop again. I ran my palm along the bench until the grain warmed under the friction. I could hear Ruth's voice teasing, You pet that wood more than you pet me. I said out loud into the air, I'm doing both, and felt silly and holy at the same time. 2 weeks passed. I let silence do the work parents are tempted to assign to lectures. Lila came by twice with groceries I didn't ask for and the kind of apologies you make with your eyes. Owen sent emails with subject lines like next steps and urgent and dad, and I responded with single sentences that sounded like sanded wood. Smooth, hard, true. Then the letter came. Thick envelope, law firm I'd never heard of, but that had a logo that looked expensive. I opened it at the kitchen counter in the late afternoon light that makes even bills look kind. Notice of petition, it said. Petition to remove trustee. The trustee was Owen. The petitioner was me. I hadn't filed it. Down the page, a paragraph that read like a footnote to a tornado, on evidence of mismanagement, conflicts of interest, and attempts to alienate homestead property. Against settlers' express wishes, petitioner seeks immediate removal of trustee and appointment of neutral fiduciary. I read it twice, then a third time, then sat down because the floor had shifted the way old floorboards do when a house settles into itself. At the bottom, the signature that made me smile despite the fact my hands had started to shake. Ruth Keene. I picked up the phone and called the number on the letterhead. A paralegal put me on hold. A voice came on that sounded like a violin with calluses. "This is Attorney Carmen Velasquez." "Mrs. Velasquez," I said, "I think you've made a mistake." "I rarely do," she said, the kind of confidence earned the long way. "What's the file?" I read it. She listened. When I finished, she hummed the way you hum when you recognize a tune from your childhood. "Not a mistake," she said. "A trigger." "A what?" "Your wife engaged our firm 7 months ago," she said, quietly. She provided instructions in the event of her death that any attempt to transfer homestead or business assets without your affirmative initiation would activate a petition on your behalf. I shut my eyes. Ruth, her thumb squeezing mine in a hospital room, saying, "You always do what you say." "You're telling me," I said, and didn't recognize my own voice for a moment, "that she planned for me not to be alone in this dance." "She loved you," the lawyer said simply, as if she were stating the weather. "And she trusted your children to love you too, but she planned for the day love might wear a different outfit." I swallowed the thing that rose in my throat and came out like a cough if I wasn't careful. "What happens next?" "We file," she said. "We bring receipts." "Receipts?" "Emails," she said. "Text messages, filings, appraisals, memos, bank statements. We put a fence around the truth so no one confuses it with opinion." I thought about Owen's binder, about my life, reduced to columns that added up, and a signature that was meant to be a surrender. "How much?" I asked. "You prepaid," she said. "Your wife did." I laughed then, short and loud, because this is how you honor the people you loved. You let their foresight embarrass you until your pride remembers it was always just a soft napkin disguised as principle. "File it," I said. "Tomorrow," she promised. That night, I dreamed I was planing a board with no end. The curl of wood fell in perfect ribbons at my feet. Ruth stood in the doorway with flour on her cheek like a birthmark and said, "You're almost there." And I said, "I know," and woke with my hand closing on nothing. When the papers were served, Owen came over with weather in his jaw. He didn't sit. He didn't breathe. "How could you?" he asked. "I didn't," I said. "Then who?" he demanded, like the question were a crowbar he could lever truth up with. "Your mother," I said, and watched the answer land in his face like rain on a windshield. First a shine, then a smear, then clarity that demanded wiping. He sat. He did breathe. He put his head in his hands like a boy who has just learned superheroes are people who pay taxes and cry at commercials. "She didn't trust me," he said into his palms. "She loved you," I said. "Two separate facts can occupy the same sentence." He looked up. I was trying to help. I know, I said. You were trying to help yourself, too. Both things can be true. He wanted to argue. I saw it rise, the way you see a wave stand up before it breaks. He swallowed it. What now? Now, I said, you learn to be my son again before you learn to be my trustee. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, something in there had shifted a degree toward the man I'd hoped he'd become. I'm sorry, he said. I know, I said. So am I. He nodded once, twice, a third time like a man hammering a nail in straight after a crooked first try. He stood, left, came back, left again. When he returned the third time, he had flowers in his hand. Not for me, for the maple. He dug a small hole and planted them under Ruth's tree. He didn't ask me to help. He didn't ask me to watch. He just did the work. Carmen filed on a Tuesday. By Friday, we were in a courtroom the color of old coins. The judge was a woman my age with hair that admitted to her years and eyes that suggested she had seen grief act as a forger. Owen sat with a lawyer whose watch cost more than my first truck. Lila sat behind me with a tissue and a look that said she was trying to remember which side of the room promised redemption. Carmen stood like someone who brings bad news in good wrapping. Your Honor, she said, this is not about money. It is about velocity. Velocity? The judge asked, amused despite herself. Grief moves slow, Carmen said. Ambition moves fast. We are here to make sure the slow thing is not run over by the fast one. The judge's mouth did a small thing that meant she liked metaphors and men who didn't hide their hands under the table. Proceed, she said. They showed the trust. They showed the amendment I'd insisted on and Owen had printed with a sigh. They showed the intent to sell. They showed the refusal of sale. They showed emails Lila had written to a realtor she shouldn't have met for coffee. They showed Ruth's note. Remember the thumb squeeze. The defense tried the usual. He's overwhelmed. We're protecting him. This is standard. Carmen met standard with specific, and specific always wins. On this date, she said, at this time, at this office, this signature. She walked us through the house of cards he'd started building and called it a house. At one point, the defense lawyer asked me to stand. Mr. Keene, he said, do you believe your children are acting in bad faith? No, I said. I believe grief is an unscrupulous salesman, and my son bought a policy he didn't read. The judge made that small mouth movement again and wrote something down I hope was, give this man back his shop. At noon, the judge recessed. In the hallway, Owen stood with his lawyer, gesturing like a man trying to swat a wasp with paperwork. Lila came to me, both hands around my forearm. I'm sorry, she said, simple and right. We made a mess. Messes can be cleaned, I said. It's what shop rags are for. Will you forgive us? She asked, because she is her mother's daughter and knows the two kinds of courage, the kind that builds and the kind that asks. Yes, I said, but forgiveness isn't a shortcut. It's a road. She kissed my cheek and left a small, damp star there that stayed longer than shame. When the judge returned, she spoke to the room like it was a class of bright children who needed only a little correction to become decent adults. Here's what we will not do, she said. We will not sell homestead or business assets without the surviving spouse's written, enthusiastic, and recent consent. We will not encumber property to create liquidity for theoretical protection. We will not confuse management with love. She paused long enough for the words to settle into our chests. Mr. Keene will remain the decider in residence. The trustee will become a bookkeeper for 6 months, with all major decisions deferred unless initiated by the settlor. After 6 months, we will revisit. Your Honor, the defense lawyer started, this is highly irregular. This is grief, she said. It is always irregular. Gavel. Papers shuffled, lives adjusted. Outside on the steps, the air felt like it had been used already by 1,000 sighs. Owen approached. No binder, no pen. Just a man with his shoulders from before he learned how to wear ambition like a suit of armor. Dad, he said, and it was the first time in months the word sounded like a roof. Son, I said. We stood without speaking. Two men learning how to be family without a woman to translate the parts we get wrong. At home, I made soup the way Ruth taught me. Start with onions, add garlic, let the smell build a reason to forgive the day. Lila chopped carrots badly, and I didn't correct her. Owen set the table like he was rediscovering the geometry of hospitality. We ate. We didn't talk about money. We talked about Emma's spelling test and how the maple seemed to be trying harder this year and whether grief ever gets bored and leaves on its own. It doesn't. After dishes, Owen stayed. He pulled a stool into the shop and watched me sand a drawer front. It's meditative, he said, surprised. It's discipline disguised as therapy, I said. He laughed. I forgot I liked this room. You liked who you were in it, I said. A kid. A maker, not a manager. He nodded. Can I? He asked and reached for a block of sandpaper. You remember with your hands, I said. He did. The first passes were eager and wrong. The second were cautious and wrong. The third were right in that way repetition makes possible. Mom would like this, he said. She is liking it, I said, actively. He looked at me the way men look at faith when it refuses to be explained and yet refuses to leave. Okay, he said, actively. The next months were slow on purpose. I split my days between the shop and the porch. I learned when grief likes to visit, mornings when the bed is too big, evenings when shadows look like someone's shoulder. I learned to make meals for one without insulting the idea of meal. I learned my children's faces when they were trying to be brave and how to interrupt their bravery with a joke about pancakes or a story about their mother's stubbornness on matters like whether lilacs count as quiche ingredients. They do not. Owen brought me paperwork to sign that was boring in a good way. Utilities, insurance renewals, a permit I hadn't realized was expiring because time doesn't respect the calendar when a season has ended inside your house. He did not bring me anything that smelled like velocity. He asked before he assumed. He listened in a way that built shelf space for the future. Lila brought me Sunday dinners and Emma when Jake had his off weekend. We built forts in the living room and let the maple leaves decorate the carpet and read the same book 3 times because Emma demanded repetition with the righteous entitlement of small children and grief. On a Tuesday, 6 months to the day after the judge drew a fence around ambition, Carmen called. Time, she said. I met Owen at the courthouse. He wore a suit. I wore the good shirt. We went before the judge, who looked at us like a gardener examines two plants she isn't sure are the same species. "Report," she said. Carmen gestured to Owen. He stood. "We've kept the assets intact," he said. "Dad has led. I've followed." "And what have you learned?" the judge asked. "That following my father is not a diminishment of me," he said, and the words had the awkward glory of truth spoken in public. "That management without love is just paperwork. That grief is slow and should be allowed to be." She nodded. "Petition denied as moot," she said, and banged the gavel like an exclamation point. On the courthouse steps, Owen put out his hand, not to shake, to thumb squeeze. I met it with my own and felt it like electricity. "She planned for this," he said. "She planned for us," I said. "She always did." On the way home, I stopped at the bakery. Tamsin boxed me a lemon pie without asking what I wanted, because some people are prophets in pastry. "How's the shop?" she asked. "Alive," I said. "Good," she said. "Houses need hearts." That Saturday, Lila insisted on a family dinner to mark the end of the beginning, which is the sort of sentence marketing people use when they want to sell you a second product called closure. She brought roast chicken and a salad with too many ingredients. Owen brought bread from a place that uses vagabond yeast and adjectives like artisanal, and sells you a loaf that tastes like someone told wheat a story about Paris. Emma brought a drawing of the maple where every leaf had a face, and all of them were smiling the same smile Ruth used when she burned the cookies and insisted they were just crunchy. We ate. We told stories. We didn't pretend. After dessert, Owen cleared his throat. That sound had always meant speech. I braced. He surprised me. "Dad," he said, "I want to resign as trustee." I blinked. "You don't have to," I said. "I know," he said. "I want to." Lila frowned. "Why?" "Because I don't want to confuse authority with intimacy," he said. "Because I want to be your son without a job description. Because I want to build something with you instead of managing what you built." I looked at him the way you look at a piece of walnut that has a knot you thought would ruin it, only to find the knot is a kind of beauty you couldn't have planned. "Who then?" I asked. He smiled. "I thought you might ask that." He reached into his pocket and slid a card across the table. It wasn't a law firm card. It was a card from the vocational school in town. "Apprenticeship program," he said. "We'd like to fund a scholarship. In Mom's name. For students who want to learn to make things with their hands." Lila's face did the thing eyes do when they are crying and laughing at the same time. "How many?" she asked. "As many as it takes to make the town smell like cedar," he said. I thumb-squeezed his hand so hard he winced. Then I said, "Okay," and we began. We built a bench first. Simple, honest, strong. The first recipient of the scholarship, Diego, 19, quiet like a forest, stood beside me at the plana and learned to listen with his fingertips. We etched RK in the underside where only those who lift know what supports them. We built a table next, long enough for family plus whoever was hungry that night. We invited neighbors who had brought casseroles and nurses who had brought steady hands, and Carmen, who had brought a fence when we needed one, and Nora, who had brought a stamp when a stamp meant safety. We built a new habit of Sundays where breakfast was pancakes and grief and laughter and every emotion in between. Ruth's chair stayed at the head of the table. We put her sun hat on the peg by the door. We did not move on. We moved with. And then, because life does not wait for you to finish a chapter before starting a new paragraph, something happened that felt like a wink from whatever author had been narrating my days. A man from the city stopped by the shop. Suit, soft hands, eyes that had purchased more than they had made. "Mr. Keene?" he said, enthusiastic the way people are when they want to look like they always loved small towns. "I represent a developer interested in your parcel." I smiled. "The homestead?" "The shop," he said, and flipped a folder open with numbers that made my accountant brain, which I don't have, do a whistle. "We'd like to make an offer." "Can't sell," I said. "Everyone can sell," he said, like a man who has only ever met everyone inside a boardroom. "Not this," I said, and tapped the bench with 2 fingers like knocking on a friend's door. "This is too heavy to move and too light to price." He smiled the smile of men who believe persistence is a synonym for inevitability. "Think about it," he said. "We'll be in touch." He was. He sent numbers with zeros like parade balloons. Owen grinned when he saw them. "Tempted?" he asked. "No," I said, because love makes some decisions easy. "But grateful." "For what?" he asked. "For the chance to teach Emma that some offers are tests," I said, "and that we pass not by refusing, but by knowing why." I wrote the developer a letter. It said, "Thank you for believing what we've built is valuable. You're right, which is why we will keep it where it can continue to make people." He never wrote back. He didn't need to. He understood, I think, in the way city men understand that some parts of the map are marked with more than roads. On the anniversary of Ruth's death, we gathered under the maple. The leaves had just begun their rehearsal. Emma hung paper hearts from the lower branches with string. Lila read a poem that didn't rhyme the way I wanted and therefore was probably better for it. Owen said grace in a voice that had learned how to be both lawyer and son without choosing one to betray the other. Then I spoke, because grief respects ceremony. "Ruth," I said, and my voice didn't break because it had learned the trick of being strong while soft. "We did as you asked. We remembered the thumb squeeze. We kept what needed keeping. We let go of what needed letting. We built, Rue. We built." The wind moved the leaves in a way that sounded like applause. Later that night, alone in the shop with only the clock and the memory of laughter to keep me company, I took out the first shelf I made for Ruth all those years ago. It was ugly in that way. Things are ugly when you didn't yet know what beauty asks of you. I ran my hand over it. I sanded it lightly. I didn't fix it. I just made it smoother in the places it had earned roughness. I put it back in the corner where it belongs. On the workbench lay the folder with the trust, the amendment, the petitions, the orders. I put them in a drawer and shut it. Not to forget, to file. I turned out the lights. I stood in the doorway and looked back at the room that had saved me. Sawdust hung in the air like snow, turning in the light from the window. I thought of all the edges I had eased in my life, all the things I had made less likely to cut. I thought of my children, who they had been, who they were becoming. I thought of Ruth, active, liking. Outside, the maple let go of another leaf. It landed on the step without a sound. I picked it up. I pressed it in the book of receipts. I went to bed in a house that still held her shape. In the morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee at the sound of Owen humming badly in the kitchen. Lila was sitting on the counter like a teenager. Emma was drawing the shop with hearts for windows. On the table, a note in a handwriting that used to correct the world's spelling. Thumb squeeze. I squeezed the air squeezed back. And if you ask me what the moral is, if these are even stories that deserve morals, I'll tell you this. When your children put a contract on your love, teach them the clause they forgot to read. When grief tries to sell you speed, buy time instead. When someone asks the price of what built you, say too much and mean no. Then get back to work. The wood is waiting. The bench needs sanding. The maple will do what it does. And somewhere, in the quiet between planing passes, the woman who taught you to measure twice and cut once will tuck a curl of sawdust behind your ear and say, "You did it, Deck. You kept what mattered." You thumb squeeze the air again just to be sure. It squeezes back.